And this gets us now into the main event for today, which is BCO 38. And so we're going through cases without process, and some are disciplinary, others are just by natural removal. Can you guys still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because my AirPods are pinging, and so I'm just trying to make sure you can hear me. And so we'll begin in BCO 38.1 when it says this: when any person shall come forward and make his offense known to the court, a full statement of the facts shall be recorded and judgment rendered without process. In handling a confession of guilt, it is essential that the person intends to confess and permit the court to render judgment without process. Statements made by him in the presence of the court must not be taken as a basis of judgment without process except by his consent. In the event of a confession is intended, a written confession, i.e., a sufficient summary of the facts, the person's specific confession, and any expression or evidence of repentance must be approved by the accused and by the court before the court proceeds to a judgment, and the co-signed documents shall be appended to the minutes, regular or executive session. No other information may be presented without written consent from the accused and the court, and this prohibition includes individuals, prosecutors, committees, and commissions. A censured person has the right to appeal according to BCO 42. The person has the right to be assisted by the counsel at any point in accord with the stipulations of BCO 32.19. And so that's the first part of 38.1. And so, well, how does 38.1 then begin to set us up for cases without process?
Well, first off, I would say because of all the changes to 38.1, it's kind of misleading to call it a case without process because there is significant process. And if the process isn't followed, the appellant can prevail. So it's kind of a misnomer, but it's essentially it's not a trial, it's an out of trial confession of guilt and an out of trial censure if appropriate. This paragraph has been changed at least 3 times, usually with additional stuff. The first change that I was involved in was Pittsburgh Presbytery way back in the late 80s when our minister went forward at a presbytery meeting unbeknownst to the session and confessed to something and then walked out of the room. And that kind of threw everybody for a loop. We didn't know what to do. So that's where the change came in that indicated that, the court needs to know that he intended to confess and that he intended for the court to administer censure without process. So that was a change that was made. And then there was a change a couple of years ago that defined what this written document was that has to be co-signed. It's not just a full statement of the facts. It's kind of a summary of the facts, his confession, and any expression or evidence of repentance. The goal of that was to try to get a document that all things can be based on. So whoever's working with the confessing person on behalf of the court will come up with a document that person or the confessor and usually the commission will judge to be sufficiently complete to render a censure. And then last year, the thing that was added was if it's a personal offense, the court needs to discern whether the offended party agrees that it's a full statement of the facts, because it may not be.
Yeah, we'll read that here in a second.
Okay, sure.
I just wanted to ask the question first.
Yep.
So this seems to do with a case, not really necessarily a case yet, but somebody else isn't accusing a different person. This is a person that's accusing themselves. They're coming forward. They're saying, this is an offense that I've done, and I'm just going to to lay it on the table and confess to it and have the court deal with it. So this would be a bit of a different than what we see in the previous chapters, right?
Yeah, I would say that would be the purest case, but those are, in my experience, kind of rare. A more common one would be it comes to the attention of the court that there might be something unbecoming in, let's say, a minister's life or doctrine. However, they learn of that, then someone goes to the minister and starts talking to him about it, and he doesn't have to engage with an investigating committee. That's maybe a different topic, but the Presbytery investigating committee might say, well, to save everybody the trouble of going through a full trial and a full appeal, are you willing to confess to this and that? And he'd say, well, I'm willing to confess to this, but not that. And then the investigating committee can work with them saying, well, listen, if you don't confess to that, then we're going to have to go to trial. So, and it's kind of wouldn't call it a negotiation, but it's, you're trying to help the person confess. You're trying to get a true, thorough, real confession. And with his knowledge that any censure is going to be based on what he puts on paper and is co-signed by him and whoever the representative of the court is. So, yeah,
I think one of the reasons we were kind of excited when we had you for this was I think you wrote the second paragraph of this, and so, or at least your presbytery was involved with it. So, if Scott wants to read us that, then maybe you can tell us.
Yeah.
But what's the reason that this was necessary change on there that just went through in the past couple of years? So, Scott, do you want to read that?
That begins with "in any instance."
Yeah, we'll have Scott read that, and then we'll have you comment on that.
So BCO 38.1 finishes in that second paragraph by saying, in any instance involving a personal offense, the court shall attempt to inform the offended persons of that part of the confession that the court deemed pertinent to the offense against him or her. The court shall invite the offended person to provide the court comment on the confession prior to the final approval of the confession by the confessor and the court. The court shall encourage the offended person to enlist the help of an advisor in preparing any such comments. In all instances, the court shall report the way such offended persons were informed of the parts of the confession pertinent to them. And so the first part of BCO 38.1 deals with perhaps both the confessor and the court signing on to a confession of someone's own guilt. And now in personal offenses, this has been added to now include those the person has himself offended. And so what was the thought process behind adding this to 38.1, Howie? Yeah,
first off, they're not included in the same way as the court and the confessor. But what precipitated this, it was in our presbytery where there was a case without process that involved a minister and a female. And I think at the presbytery meeting when the committee was recommending that presbytery approve X as the full statement, either before we voted or after we voted, somebody said, well, did the personally offended person corroborate the statement? And it was kind of a squishy answer. I think it was after we voted. And then found out later that the person who was personally offended did not and probably would not have corroborated it. So we wanted to add a paragraph that protected the court, protected the confessor, and protected the personally offended person. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in this. So that the court has to attempt to inform the offended person of whatever part of the confession the court deems is pertinent, and invite them to comment on it. But they don't have veto power over the process. They don't have veto power over the statement of facts. But at least this is a requirement that the court needs to seek some kind of a response. Now, there will be situations, we had one recently where a wife declined to comment. and that's her prerogative. And, you know, in a marriage situation, it's probably not unusual that the wife might not comment. And we decided it would be smart to try to enlist help for that personally offended person. So in the case I just referenced, we found an elder's wife that worked with her and informed her of she got to see the written confession and decided whether to respond or not. So, you know, I interacted with the person that we appointed or suggested that she counsel with rather than directly with her. So yeah, it's just a way to make even more sure that whatever confession the court is signing off on is actually a full enough confession. So.
Yeah, it seems wise that if somebody is looking at 38-1, especially as a way to kind of hit something off at the pass, you know, get it out of the way so that you can say, we've already dealt with this. It at least takes into consideration that if the person there was another person that was offended against, that we actually know what they did. I mean, you can think of like somebody saying, well, I verbally assaulted this person. And then if you actually talk to them, like, well, he actually verbally assaulted me and pushed me down. And you're like, okay, we didn't have all the facts. And so it'd be nice to know that before we just say, you know, we've accepted his confession and now we're moving on. We have to know if we have all the facts before we move on. So I was happy when this came through of like, yeah, this seems like this would be, at least it should have been wise that you should have done this before, but putting it actually in the book that you need to make some sort of an effort. I was glad for that.
And the other reason for it is that everything is based on this written confession, this document that's co-signed by the court or the representatives of the court and the confessor, and presumably nothing else. Here it is. This is these 431 words is what you base the censure on. And that's why I think it's really best, at least at a presbytery level, that it be a commission that has full authority to take care of it from beginning to end. Because once you get in front of the presbytery and somebody asks a question or somebody makes a speech, it could really poison the whole procedure. And we've sustained several complaints in 38-1 cases because additional material was added before voting on the censure. Williams versus Chesapeake, Wilborn versus Pacific, Evans versus Arizona. We recently had one, I think it was Nashville, where a guy signed the confession in a 38-1 and then the presbytery imposed deposition and he said, wait, I didn't know you were going to do that. And he lost his appeal because once you sign the paper, it's kind of out of your hands. So we've had a lot of 38-1 cases, which makes me think that I don't know how to write legislation because I don't think everybody was wrong. I think it was the author probably, but I don't know how to fix it.
And you sent us like a sample of a document. Yeah. Is that something that like people can send to you for, or something we should put on there for? Because this is helpful. I think if you're actually trying to create a document, this would be a helpful sample for somebody to work their way through.
I was invited to present that at the clerks conference, Presbytery Clerks Conference in December, and I think Per Almquist put that on the website somewhere. He said, I think, but
on the clerks website.
I think so.
All right, so people can look for 38-1 sample document on the PCA clerks website, and if you're going through this,
so if you use it and screw it up, I'll have to recuse myself if the case comes up because I'm to blame.
All right, that's great.
But we also have I don't know if I included this or not. Pacific Northwest had a shepherding committee, and it wore a white hat and a black hat at the same time, and we divided that up. So we've got a preliminary investigating committee now, a 5-man preliminary investigating committee. We're essentially the cops. If the Ministers and Churches Committee calls you, they're the white hat guys. You can talk to them without jeopardy. If somebody from the PIC calls you, it's the cops, and you better Mirandize yourself or consider doing that. And usually, if there's a 38-1 case, they'll refer it, the moderator and the clerk will refer it to the PIC, and and we take it from there. So
good to have those committees separate in some ways. Yeah. All right. Anything else we need to cover?
In some regards, like when you're dealing with 38-1s, is it somewhat that if you come forward as your own accuser that you'll have a kinder experience with the court itself, like you might have a lesser censure or something of that nature? I guess I'm trying to wondering, like, if I find myself in this situation, is it better to come forward for the sake of my entire life or to have it go to trial?
Well, if I was somebody's defense counsel, I would say, I mean, it depends on the offense, but I would talk on his behalf with the chairman of the commission and say, listen, he's willing to admit A, B, and C, but he doesn't think D. He doesn't think he did D. If you're going to insist on him confessing to D, we're going to have to go to trial. So, you know, he's willing to confess to A, B, and C. And I know it sounds like you're plea bargain negotiating and stuff, and that seems odd in a church, but I hate trials. They're just complicated, and a lot of times they're very disruptive in a presbytery. And what we do in our presbytery, or at least what we're going to do, is the commission can tell the guy, well, if you confess to A, B, and C, we're going to impose a definite suspension of 12 months. They don't have to tell him that, but in the case I referenced out of Nashville, in a concurring opinion, I wrote that ministers ought to be careful signing these things without knowing what's going to be recommended or hopefully what's going to be imposed, because if you're thinking it warrants indefinite suspension or definite suspension, and you sign it and they depose you, that's your tough luck. So the other thing about PCA courts is we don't have sentencing guidelines. A guy may think that he's confessing to A and that warrants a 4-month definite suspension, and the commission or the presbytery could say, well, no, we think he should be deposed. So I think a conversation about what's the likely censure would behoove the person making the confession. But, you know, we all want our own repentance to be pure and motivated by the love for Christ, not for consequences. But it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, we had...
Sometimes to quote Reagan, sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah. We had at our session level, we had to deal with a 38-1 at one point. And for us, it at least was evidence that the process of repentance had begun, because he's the one that came to us. And he's saying, I've already done this. I want you guys to know about this. And he basically was like, but dust off your BCOs. We need to take a look at this. And so we took that as this is a really good sign. And it really kind of warmed our heart. And we didn't like to be dealing with it, but we thought this is actually showing the work of the Holy Spirit on their hearts. And so it did influence us in how we dealt with it. So I imagine it would that way, at least at the session level, people that know their flock and want to shepherd them well.
Yeah, if somebody comes forward and confesses something that no one would have found out about except by that guy's confession, that's beautiful.
Yeah, even better than Nathan and then David there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we want to go on to 38-2?
Yeah, 38-2 switches it up just a bit. When a minister of the gospel against whom there are no charges is fully satisfied in his own conscience that God has not called him to the ministry, or if he has satisfactory evidence of his inability to serve the church with acceptance, may report these facts at a stated meeting of presbytery. At the next stated meeting, if after full deliberation of the presbytery shall concur with him in judgment, it may divest him of his office without censure. This provision shall in like manner apply with any necessary changes to the case of ruling elders and deacons. But in all such cases, the session of the church to which the ruling elder or deacon who seeks demission belongs shall act as the presbytery acts in a similar cases with a minister is concerned. And so perhaps it's helpful if we distinguish between deposition and divestment. What is the distinction?
Divestment is an administrative deposition rather than a disciplinary deposition in a sense. And there's a wide variety of situations that can fall under 38.2. I think it's reasonable to conjecture that not all men that go into the ministry are gifted and qualified to go into the ministry. So at some point in time, some guys will say, well, you know, I can't keep a job as a minister. So I think I should go into another field of work. Or a guy's without call for a lengthy period of time, and there's another chapter that deals with that. But he could say, I guess, I don't know, I don't think I'm called to ministry anymore because no one wants to hire me. And then he could, he goes through this process with the presbytery, which has to have, stated meeting, and they have full deliberation, and they either, agree with them or they try to talk him out of it or something else. But there's also situations where, although I hope I'm not shoehorning it into this section, but sometimes a minister will do something that makes people question whether he should still be a minister, and yet it's not really necessarily a case without process or an indictable thing. And he says, well, I'd like to just, rather than go through unpacking this or whatever deal, I think I'd like to divest. And then the presbytery has the decision of whether, well, does this need to be pursued as 38.1, or does this need to be pursued as formal process, or is this the best of all worlds to just let this guy divest? So sometimes I'd recommend the latter, but it depends on the facts. But if it was the latter, it would fall under this section here, I think.
Yeah, I knew a guy, it was in the OPC, but he was a pastor for a while, and then after a while, it's like, I think I can keep up with this. Wanted to go into a different field, but he still wanted to serve the church. And so he divested, but then also, or was divested, but then he came back as a deacon because he's like, I want to serve the church. It's just, I don't think I should be the guy preaching. And so it was this like, okay, there wasn't something scandalous that happened. He just didn't feel like he was called to do this. So it's good that we have a provision for that.
I think if you divest, or if you voluntarily divest, or even divested against your will, you have to go through ordination trials to come back. If you're deposed, once the presbytery lifts your deposition, you're back as a minister without call. I don't know how that bears on anything, but it is a difference.
Yeah.
In one sense, divesting is a more significant.
Yeah, I think he demitted. So yeah.
Procedurally.
Yeah.
Okay.
And demitting is the same thing as divesting.
Yeah, demitting is what the minister does. Divest is what the court does.
And so we see in 38.2, though, that it's not typically something you do half-heartedly, that it takes some time to divest. It seems around 2 meetings. The presbytery has to be made known of your request, and then at the next stated meeting after that request is received, you may act upon it. And so there's at least a trial period to discern, I think, for the court to discern whether this is the right way to go, or to better understand the facts on why the man's divesting or seeking to be divested.
I mean, we lost a good number of ministers during COVID, and some of those guys, were younger ministers, and older guys in the PCA were able to talk to them and say, listen, don't question your call, because this is just a weird time. So yeah, I mean, there will be guys that might think they need to leave and they really don't need to leave. So
that's called Mondays for pastors.
yeah. Oh my.
Don't resign on a Monday.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
All right. Do you want to do 38?
Moving on to B 38.3, we'll do A and B separately. A is when a member or officer of the Presbyterian Church in America shall attempt to withdraw from the communion of this branch of the visible church by affiliating with some other branch, if at the time of the attempt to withdraw he is in good standing, the irregularity shall be recorded, his new membership acknowledged, and his name removed from the roll. But if at the time of the attempt to withdraw there is a record of an investigation in process, or there are charges concerning the member or minister, the court of original jurisdiction may retain his name on the roll and conduct the case, communicating the outcome upon completion of the proceedings to that member or minister. If the court does not conduct the case, and his new membership shall be acknowledged, his name removed from the rolls, and at the request of the receiving branch, the matter under investigation or the charges shall be communicated to them. And so here we have both the process for a church member, but also an officer of the church seeking to withdraw its membership and to join another body that is a true branch of the church. And so what are some qualifiers for things that could perhaps slow a transfer of a church member down?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the renunciation of jurisdiction paragraph. And the SJC has pretty much ruled that if there's not a record of a 31-2 investigation, which probably would be demonstrated by a motion adopted in the court's minutes, if that doesn't exist and there are no charges against you, and you send an email to the session and say, listen, I'm withdrawing from the PCA. I intend to join First Baptist. You note the irregularity and remove his name from the rolls. There has been some SJC, I don't know if it was another Evans versus Arizona, but what does affiliated with some other branch mean? Does he actually have to be received as a member? And if I recall correctly, the SJC ruled that we didn't need definitive evidence that he had joined the other church, because sometimes there are branches that don't provide that as a document or whatever. So basically, he just says, I'm withdrawing from the PCI. Unless there's a investigation or charges, and then if the court wants to, they could conduct a trial in absentia. I can't recall one ever happening, but it's possible.
I have perhaps a question concerning like some prudence with how we might deal with those asking to be withdrawn from our membership. When perhaps someone comes under investigation, they often flee. I'm thinking of more of the church member than the pastor. Is it wise for the church to continue pursuit of that? And perhaps when they just ask to be removed and leave me alone, don't talk to me ever again, when should the court just stop? To avoid perhaps even legal jeopardy in the civil court, but where's some wisdom for dealing with someone who is seeking to flee discipline, who's a church member, and they say, please just leave me alone. If you don't leave me alone, I'm going to sue you.
Yeah, I think there's another provision in the book where someone that wants to do that, that you counsel them that they really should transfer to another branch, but if they, and then in the end you can say, well, this is removing your name from the rolls is an act of pastoral discipline that you've brought upon yourself. I don't remember which section that is, but I've been around long enough to know that at some point they're just not going to answer your emails anymore or talk to you on the phone or whatever. And, there's not much not much you can do. But I mean, they're accountable to the Lord. If the session said, we think this is bad for your soul and this is wrong, and I mean, he's going to be accountable for that advice that he disregarded. But
yeah, this section almost seems to also prevent like a bitter session. Somebody withdraws and then they were like, well, we're going to do a trial against you. No, just like if somebody is moving, if you haven't started that investigation, you haven't started that process, they just need to be allowed to go and have some of their rights as a member.
Yeah, essentially, because that process hasn't started yet, technically the person isn't fleeing process because it hasn't begun. There is an important provision at the end. There is if they're under an indictment, for example, and the session decides, well, we're not going to conduct a trial in absentia, they shouldn't send. They need to be careful what they send to the receiving church. And it says at the request of the receiving branch, which I understand that to mean that it would be okay. The receiving church would not have any idea that there were charges unless the sending session or the original session informed them of that. So I think it makes sense to read this as understanding the session could say, well, we can't transfer them in good standing because there was an investigation in progress, details of which we can supply upon your request. That way, they're kind of insulated legally, maybe. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but yeah.
And then BCO 38.3b is basically a similar provision going with those outside of the visible church. When a member or minister of the Presbyterian Church in America shall attempt to withdraw from the communion of this branch of the visible church by affiliating with a body judged by the court of original jurisdiction as failing to maintain the word and sacrament in their fundamental integrity, that member or minister shall be warned of this danger, and if he persists, his name shall be erased from the roll. Thereby, so far as the Presbyterian Church in America is concerned, he is deemed no longer to be a member of any body which rightly maintains the word and sacrament in their fundamental integrity. And if an officer, whereby withdrawing from him all authority to exercise his office as derived from this church, when so acting, the court shall make a full record of the matter and shall notify the offender of its action. And so this is not withdrawing to another branch of the visible church, but a branch of the church that the PCA doesn't recognize as a true branch of the church.
Yeah, so the way this usually plays out in the presbytery is Minister John Doe announces he's going to the RPCNA. So 38.3 kicks in, and then at the presbytery meeting, someone could make a motion regarding 38.3b. Unless someone makes 38.3b motion, it's kind of a done deal. But someone could say, well, I don't think the RPCNA. I think the RPCNA is a branch that paragraph B is talking about. Therefore, I think paragraph B should apply. And then there's debate in the presbytery as to whether or not that denomination is fits into B or not. Yeah. That could be. I mean, we probably have different lists of what denominations fit into B, but
yeah. I would think that would be a hard case on appeal. That if they're a NAPARC church, yeah, we're probably like, yeah, no. I think we generally recognize them. Although I could see this as more clear cut. It's Roman Catholic Church or it's Jehovah's Witness or something like that.
Well, yeah, Jason Stellman left Pacific Northwest and went to the Catholic Church. That was pretty easy to do B there.
Yeah.
But
so for others, is it basically just the discretion of the court, like PCUSA or something like that, of when something like it comes up? Is that appealable, or is that just like, hey, whatever the presbytery?
It's complainable. I'm surprised we haven't got one yet. But some would say, I think the someone says, I think the ACNA is category B. Presbytery didn't judge it that way. I file a complaint, it goes to the SJC, and I hope we never get that case, but I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
Moving on to 38.4. When a member of a particular church has willfully neglected the church for a period of 1 year, or has made it known that he has no intention of fulfilling the church vows, then the session, continuing to exercise pastoral discipline in the spirit of Galatians 6:1, shall remind the member, if possible both in person and in writing, of the declarations and promises by which he entered into a solemn covenant with God and his church, and warn him that if he persists, his name shall be erased from the rolls. If after diligently pursuing such pastoral discipline and after further inquiry and due delay, the session is of the judgment that the member will not fulfill his membership obligations in this or any other branch of the visible church, then the session shall erase his name from the roll. This erasure is an act of pastoral discipline without process. The session shall notify the person, if possible, whose name has been removed. Notwithstanding the above, if a member thus warned makes a written request for process, the session shall grant such a request. Further, if the session determines that any such offense, any of such a member is of the nature of process is necessary, then the session may institute such process.
Yeah, so 38.3a involves a member going to a good denomination, 38.3b going to a bad denomination, 38.4 going nowhere. And, you know, this is probably, I'm guessing every session has probably had this. So willfully neglected the church for a period of 1 year is kind of a subjective wording. Usually, you know, sessions say, well, nobody's seen this family for a year. Sometimes they'll send an email to the session saying, remove me from the rolls, I have no intention of fulfilling the membership vows. And the session says, well, where are you going? Well, we're not going anywhere, we just want to be off the rolls. And then you complete the process of 38.4 there. We used to have, in one of the churches I was in, we call it the Fisher Cut Bait letter for people we haven't seen in a while, and we tried to make contact, but you know, they just weren't really that interested anymore. And then we put in a letter, essentially the essence of 38.4, but we just called it the Fisher Cut Bait letter.
I think every clerk needs to have, you know, that first letter of, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, we love you, you need to come back, and then has to have that letter of like, hey, you really, like, you're in danger here. So both of those as sample letters there. Yeah, for sure. I wonder there's that language of pastoral discipline. This is an act of pastoral discipline. I've sometimes heard this referred to as almost like soft excommunication. How does the session understand what they're doing in 38.4? Is this soft excommunication? What is this? Yeah. Yeah.
What we would say to them is that when you look at the membership vows in 57, the word church is capitalized. In the Book of Church Order, the only time that the word church is capitalized is when it's referring to the PCA or the Universal Church. So when you're taking those vows, you're promising to support the church, capital C. And 38.4 talks about someone who isn't going to go to any church. So the pastoral discipline is, I mean, you took a vow to be a supportive member of Christ's church, and you're not even going to another church. So it is kind of it's a self-excommunication. I mean, you could even put that in the letter. You're removing yourself from the covenant family without apparently understanding the weight of that, whatever. Yeah. And they may write back and say, well, no. We're still looking. We don't want to. And then you could say, well, all right, we'll keep you on the roll till you find another church, or, I mean, the session can handle that however they want, depending on the people. But to say, I mean, it's essentially renouncing your covenant with the church, capital C church. So
Yeah. I think it's helpful in Morton Smith's commentary. He has an outline of the steps required. And I think it's helpful. He has one, the personal visit, you're trying to go after them. Number 2, warning them in writing, perhaps both personally and in writing. And then it has some due time for further inquiry. So I think it's helpful for sessions to note you don't send the letter and then your next motion is to erase them from the rolls. You have to give them some time to respond before you get to the 4th step, which is then you have a removal from the rolls.
Yeah, because time is really not of the essence. It's not something that has to be done today. It may be that they say, well, we don't really like Elder Donahoe up front on Sunday morning. And then the sessions got away. Maybe we should ask him not to be up front on Sunday morning ever again or something. I mean, there was a reason they joined in the first place, and now they want to leave. And a lot of times they won't tell you why. Yeah. Half the time they're getting ready to get divorced, and they don't think that staying a member is a good idea or whatever. But
what's interesting in this section is that the member still has rights when the session seeks to remove them from the rolls without process. And so the member at the end there says, notwithstanding the above, a member thus sworn making a request for process can have his process. And so what are some examples perhaps of that process? What would that look like? Trying to prove they were there in the last year, or what that seems
that's
kind
a
of
great
difficult.
Question, because it doesn't define the process. We had a case recently where the SJC ruled that if you want to increase a minister's censure from indefinite suspension to excommunication, you have to have some kind of process. You just can't do that by a motion. But the SJC didn't define what the process is. I think Jim Eggert in Florida is crafting a overture to define that process a little bit. But in this case, I guess it would be, they would say, well, here's why we haven't been there over the last year. What led you to believe we had no intention of fulfilling our church vows? We're still giving, or, I don't know. Process just means you got to have a discussion about it, I guess. But certainly, I don't think it would be like a trial process, because someone who's
Exhibit A.
I have no memory.
Jane Doe hasn't seen you in 12 months.
No one's going to ask for process. Yeah.
Well, looking at all this, if we don't have more questions on section 4 there, this actually might be a section that is referred to a lot by sessions. Probably you're going to deal with more cases without process than you are for them, especially with somebody that's not been there for a year. What would you want to tell sessions that are opening this section of the book and they're trying to do this right? Anything pastorally you want to say to them, or process that they need to remember just looking at this whole chapter?
Well, certainly on the haven't been there for a year, hopefully there's contact during that year, because all of a sudden now Jane and Bill Smith get a letter saying, we haven't seen you in a year. And they write back and say, well, you haven't called us in a year either, So that 1 year thing is just, I don't know, somebody wrote that and said, well, we got to put some kind of a number on it. But yeah, pastoral care, you're going to know well before a year that this couple and this family is not really that interested anymore. And, we oftentimes help people find churches they're more comfortable with in our area out here in Boise. And we used to do that in Pittsburgh too. And let me think, what else? The 38-1 thing, if I was to write another, I'm not going to. If I was to write another change to that, I would say courts are strongly encouraged to, although nobody likes strongly, courts are encouraged to use commissions to do 38-1s, because we had a 38-1 in our presbytery not too long ago where the preliminary investigating committee was a commission to decide whether the confession was complete or not. We judged it as being complete and sufficient and we recommended a censure of indefinite suspension, but the censure was debatable. We didn't think to say we recommend it be non-debatable, 2/3 vote to limit debate kind of thing. And during the debate, things were raised that probably were additional to the confession. And it's just hard to stay on the written document as the entirety of what we're basing this censure on. If you allow Q&A or, I think it should be this censure because, so I think it's really tailor-made for commissions rather than the whole body. So, and you put the people on the commission that you think are the best for the job, Create an ad hoc commission if you need to, but taking it to the floor, it's you're just asking for trouble. And I've moderated 38-1 things, and as a moderator, I'm up front and I said, no, we can't go there. No, we can't go there. And it's just not worth it. Just let the commission decide it.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to plug or things that are coming up? I think this will come out just before General Assembly. So just for people to come up and say hi to you if they see you at General Assembly.
Yeah, but they have to provide me a Tootsie Roll Pop. That's the requirement. So.
You'll know who listened to this by the Tootsie Roll.
Yes.
0 Tootsie Rolls.
Yeah.
No, I think there aren't any there's no 38-1 stuff coming up this year. So no worry about that.
Yeah.
Not yet, anyway.
That I know of.
Yeah.
You got a few days, don't you? Like tomorrow?
Although Pacific Northwest probably sent in a historically long overture this year.
Yes, it did.
20 pages. So, yeah.
Yeah.
You're a wild man for making us keep those whereases.
Oh, no. I rebelled against whereases years ago.
I know, but you said you had to keep all of the rationale.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, he says it's a 20-page overture, and he forces us to keep the rationale on it.
Yeah, well.
So
We'll see. I know
the handbook is longer this year, thanks to Howie. Yeah.
I know Dr. Chappell wasn't thrilled with that, so.
All right. Well, I think at the end, Ben is going to insert introduction so they know who we're talking to. I don't think we properly introduced you, but Ben will put that at the beginning, and then he'll give us some sort of an outro too. But Ben can't talk right now, so we'll just go ahead and finish up here. And just thank you for giving us some of your time, especially with 38. This is great. I think it'll be helpful for people to try to figure out how to apply this. And I especially liked your categorization of there's a section for going to a good church, a bad church, and nowhere. So
yeah,
that's now my headings in my BCO
Yes, okay.
over those sections. So, yes, thank you very much, Howie, for doing that.
And you can feel free to do anything you want with those 38-1 things I sent you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, people can look those up in the Corks page, and
yeah, if it's there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's going to, when Ben hits stop on recording, it's going to upload your audio track, and then just make sure we have that before you fully sign off. Anything else we need to do, Ben? Do you have any final words to? Okay.